The air hung thick and cold, smelling of pine needles, damp soil, and something metallic. Something that always clung to places where life had been aggressively cut short. It was 3:17 a.m. when Detective Elias Thorne's phone vibrated, an ugly sound that tore through the fragile quiet of his empty apartment. He didn't need to look. He knew it was bad. The kind of bad that sticks to your soul like tar. "You need to see this, Thorne. The silence here is worse than the screams." The voice on the other end belonged to Sergeant Ben Garcia, Thorne's partner, a man whose cynicism was usually bulletproof. Tonight, it had a hairline crack. Thorne was on the outskirts of the sprawling Redwood National Park within 20 minutes, his battered sedan coughing as it hit the dirt track. The scene was bathed in the harsh, almost theatrical light of floodlights mounted on police vans. He ducked under the yellow tape, the smell of fresh earth growing stronger. It wasn't a body they had found. It was the hole. It was a perfectly rectangular grave, meticulously dug, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and nearly 6 feet deep. A burial plot prepared with a chilling, almost respectful precision. And next to it, not in it, lay the victim, Oleg Sviridov, 32, a local mechanic. He was sprawled on the muddy bank, his face frozen in a profound, agonizing defeat. A single, dark, rusted pistol lay inches from his hand. The initial report was suicide, but nothing about this scene felt like a simple ending. Who digs their own grave first? Thorne crouched down, ignoring the mud soaking his expensive slacks. He focused on the details. Oleg's hands were torn up, blisters blooming on his palms, confirming he'd been the one to wield the shovel, a shovel that was leaning against a nearby redwood, waiting. But the most unsettling detail wasn't the grave or the body. It was a small, perfectly carved wooden toy train resting on the edge of the pit, seemingly placed there as a macabre farewell gift. "Suicide, huh, Garcia?" Thorne's voice was a low rasp, a sound earned from too many late nights and too many bad cigarettes. Garcia rubbed a hand over his tired face. "That's what the brass wants, Elias. Self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. No struggle, no defensive wounds. But the friend, Vyacheslav Matrosov, he's the one who called it in. Said Oleg was distraught, that he'd gone out here to end it all. He's at the station now, crying his eyes out, says he's gutted." Thorne straightened, his gaze fixed on the dense, dark woods surrounding them. And what does Slav Matrosov have to say about the perfectly dug pit? Did Oleg just get the urge for some late-night landscaping before pulling the trigger? Garcia sighed, pulling a notepad from his pocket. "That's where it gets sticky, Elias. Slav was Oleg's best friend, but Slav's a father. He has a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. And 2 days ago, Slav found evidence, video footage, unforgivable footage, that Oleg had been molesting her." He snapped. The metallic smell suddenly made sense. It wasn't just blood and cold iron. It was the sharp, acidic tang of righteous, devastating fury. So we have a dad, a man whose world just went supernova, who finds the predator in his own backyard, and that predator ends up dead next to a grave he apparently dug himself. Thorne summarized, the pieces clicking into place with a terrifying logic. This wasn't just a suicide, Ben. This was a man given a choice. Dig your own grave or I'll do it for you. And when he finished the work, the pressure, the sheer crushing weight of what he'd done, of being caught, was enough. But something felt wrong. Too neat, too tidy. Where is the evidence of the coercion? Did Slav force him here with the gun? Did he stand and watch? Slav insists he didn't. Says he followed Oleg out after receiving a frantic text, found the pit, and then found Oleg. But here's the kicker, Elias. Slav's wife, Natalia, is an ICU nurse, highly respected, completely clean record. Slav himself, former rocket engine plant worker, no history of violence, just a quiet life. The local community is already forming a perimeter around him. They see a hero, not a murderer. Thorn picked up the toy train, its tiny wheels still turning smoothly, a child's forgotten joy juxtaposed against adult despair. Get a warrant for Slav's property, Ben. I want to know where that shovel came from, and I want a full breakdown of their phone records. Start with the hours leading up to the text. No one digs their own grave in the middle of the night unless someone they trust or fear tells them to. This isn't just about a crime. It's about a man's devastating, absolute personal stake. He looked back at Oleg Sviridov, the victim who was also the monster. The lines of the case were instantly blurred. "This is going to be hell, isn't it?" Garcia muttered. "We're already there," Thorn replied, dropping the toy train into an evidence bag, the plastic crinkling like a nervous whisper. "Let's go talk to our grieving father." The race was on, not just to find the truth, but to keep the community's emotional storm from swallowing the justice system whole.
The interrogation room at the station was a stark box of cinder blocks and weak fluorescent light. Vyacheslav Matrosov sat opposite Thorn, his face a mask of exhausted grief, his shoulders still carrying the invisible weight of a shovel. He looked less like a potential killer and more like a man who just survived a catastrophe. "Tell me again, Slav," Thorn began, leaning forward, his voice low and steady, a velvet trap. "You found out what Oleg did. Unforgivable. What happened next?" Slav's eyes were red-rimmed and distant. I went blind with it, detective. I found the videos. Proof. On his tablet. My own daughter? I called him. I just needed to see his face, to hear him admit it." He paused, his hands twisting a damp tissue into a shredded pulp. "He met me. At his garage. I didn't hit him, I swear. I didn't need to. He knew. He just knew what he'd done to my little girl. And then you two took a scenic drive to the woods, a place where you just happened to have a new shovel and a perfectly measured spot for a grave." "No. He was weeping, detective, saying he was a monster. He said he deserved to die. He said he couldn't live with it. He just drove to that spot. It was his family plot. They owned that patch of land decades ago. He said he wanted to be buried there, near his grandmother." Slav's story was practiced, almost too smooth, but the raw emotion behind the tears felt devastatingly real. Garcia, watching from the observation room, signaled to Thorn. "Warrant approved. Going in now." Thorn shifted gears. "Slav, the shovel, where did it come from?" "Oleg's garage. He kept tools there. He threw it in his trunk. Said he was going to do the work of a dead man right then." Slav put his head in his hands. "I tried to stop him. I begged him to go to the police, to confess. But he was gone, detective. Shattered. He started digging, saying that dirt was the only thing that could make him clean again. And the gun." Slav looked up, a shudder running through his frame. That was his, too. He always kept it in his glove compartment. Said he'd use it on himself if he ever messed up beyond repair. He finished the hole, looked at me. He just asked me to promise that my wife Natalia would forgive him for dragging me into it. And then, he did it. I ran. I just ran and called 911. Thorn let the silence hang heavy, watching the father struggle. He knew this man was lying, but the lie was wrapped in so much agonizing truth that dissecting it felt like slicing a nerve. It was then Garcia's voice crackled over the secure line, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Thorn, we found something. Not at Slav's place, at Oleg's garage. It's a game changer." Thorn excused himself, leaving Slav alone with his grief and his carefully constructed narrative. Garcia met him in the hallway, his face tight. "We processed Oleg's place, found the tablet, confirming the footage, but we also found a safe deposit key under his mattress. And this." Garcia held up a small sealed evidence bag. Inside was a syringe, carefully capped and half full of a clear, viscous liquid. "The lab's running tests, but Natalia is an ICU nurse, Thorn, and the syringe is hospital grade." This was the major clue that twisted the investigation into a sickening, complex knot. If Oleg was coerced into suicide, the physical evidence of that coercion shouldn't be a shovel, but a weapon that leveraged his trust. Did Slav take the gun to the scene, make Oleg dig and then leave him with a suicide weapon? Or did he use something that wouldn't leave a trace, something only someone with medical access would know how to use? Garcia's look confirmed the shared, terrifying thought. "We checked the ME's preliminary report on Oleg. Besides the gunshot, he had an abnormally low blood pressure and elevated levels of a certain sedative, not lethal on its own, but enough to make a person sluggish, cooperative, and deeply compliant before the end." Thorn slapped the wall, the sound echoing in the deserted hallway. Natalia, the nurse. Slav didn't coerce him with a gun and a grave. He used his wife's access to drugs to subdue him, forced him into that psychological torture session, digging his own grave, and then let him choose his ending with the gun. He didn't just encourage suicide, he engineered it with surgical precision. He looked back at the interrogation room where Slav sat slumped. The stakes weren't just personal now. They were professional, ethical, and entirely premeditated. The dark truth was always hidden in the details the grief was designed to obscure. The shovel and the gun were the distraction. The sedative was the key.
Thorn stared at the evidence bag containing the syringe. The cold plastic, a shocking contrast to the warm, tearful narrative Slav had just spun. This wasn't just a crime of passion, this was a calculated professional takedown. And Natalia, the ICU nurse, was the unseen partner. He re-entered the interrogation room, the energy shifting instantly. Slav looked up, a faint flicker of apprehension in his eyes, like a glitch in the software of his grief. Thorn didn't sit. He slid the evidence photo of the syringe across the table. Hospital-grade Slav, found at Oleg's garage. The ME found a sedative in Oleg's system, enough to make him dizzy, compliant, and slow. Not enough to kill him, but enough to make digging a 6-foot hole in the middle of the night feel like a surrender. The air in the room thickened, every molecule vibrating with unspoken accusation. Slav's carefully constructed composure began to fracture. He paled, staring at the photo, his lips moving soundlessly. "You didn't just meet him, Slav. You drugged him. You used your wife's access to hospital supplies. You didn't just appeal to his conscience. You chemically broke him down. This wasn't a choice. It was a performance you directed, and Natalia was your prop master." Thorn's voice was a low, devastating rumble. Slav finally slammed his fist on the table. "You don't know anything. You think I'm the monster? He ruined our life. He took my daughter's innocence. I didn't want him to die, detective. I wanted him to suffer, to understand the hole he dug in my family's life." He was shouting now, the grief finally morphing into a raw, frightening rage. "He chose the end. I just gave him the stage and the spotlight." Thorn leaned in, inches from Slav's face. The grave wasn't for Oleg, Slav. It was for you. Your guilt, your rage. You made him dig it so you wouldn't have to carry the shovel. But this sedative, that takes planning. That takes two people. Suddenly, the door burst open. It wasn't Garcia, it was Natalia Matrosov. She was flanked by her lawyer, her face drawn, her nurse scrubs wrinkled from a night spent at the hospital. Or maybe just a night spent grappling with absolute dread. "I need to speak to my husband," she stated, her voice trembling but rigid with professional control. "You're a suspect, Mrs. Matrosov. Accessory to murder. Encouraging suicide." "No," she said, her eyes locked on Slav, a cold, shattering look of betrayal that silenced the room. She turned to her lawyer, took a shaky breath, and said the three words that completely detonated Slav's case. "I gave him the sedative." Slav lurched forward, his face a mask of shock and pure devastation. "Natalia, no, you promised." She ignored him, her gaze fixed on Thorn. "I took a vial of midazolam from the ICU supply. I gave it to Slav. I knew what he was going to do. I didn't help him drug Oleg. I didn't know about the grave until Slav called me, hysterical, saying Oleg was dead. But I gave him the means to control the situation. I did it for Lily." Thorn felt a chilling wave wash over him. This was the surprising twist. Natalia wasn't the co-conspirator Slav had protected. She was the one protecting him now, not with silence, but with a calculated partial confession designed to shield him from the murder charge while accepting a lesser, shared responsibility. But then she added a detail that sent the narrative reeling again. Oleg didn't just find the footage, detective. He sent it to Slav, a confession of sorts, a text that read, "I'm sorry, brother. I can't stop. Here is the proof. Do what you have to do." This wasn't just a confrontation born of discovery. It was an execution invited by the victim himself. The grave wasn't just physical. It was psychological, a final request for damnation delivered by a best friend. "Oleg invited his own murder?" Garcia whispered from the doorway. Thorn looked from the defeated Slav to the clinically resolute Natalia. This wasn't just about justice for Lily. It was about an elaborate, terrifying contract between a predator and his executioner. The betrayal wasn't Natalia turning on Slav. It was Slav's betrayal of the shared secret, forcing Natalia into the light. And now the climactic confrontation was about to begin, not in the woods, but in the court of public opinion, where the Matrosov family were already martyrs.
The Matrosov household was a fortress of grief and indignation, the center of a media storm. Thorn and Garcia had the sedative, the confession, and the victim's final, damning text. But the public, fueled by the hero-father narrative, saw only the monstrous act of a predator and the righteous fury of a parent. The legal battle would be the climactic confrontation, fought in a tense hearing that determined bail. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with hostile energy. Natalia, having made her partial confession, was granted bail, her lawyer successfully arguing her role was limited to misguided spousal support rather than active coercion to commit a capital crime. Slav, however, remained detained. Thorn was called to the stand. He meticulously laid out the sequence, the victim, Oleg, sending the proof and the plea for execution, the sedative supplied by Natalia, the coerced grave digging, and the final self-inflicted gunshot wound. This was premeditated psychological torture, Your Honor, Thorn stated, his voice ringing with conviction. Mr. Matrosov engineered a situation that forced a broken man to physically prepare for his own death. The sedative was the key to eliminating resistance. During cross-examination, Slav's defense attorney, a sharp, theatrical man named Petrov, launched a blistering attack on Thorne's narrative, turning the evidence of the sedative into a symbol of a desperate father's mercy. "Detective Thorne," Petrov purred, pacing before the jury box, "you concede that the victim, Oleg Sviridov, invited his own death via text message, correct?" "He invited Matrosov to do what he had to do, yes." "And you concede that the fatal wound was self-inflicted using the victim's own weapon, correct?" "Correct." Petrov smirked. "Then the sedative, provided by a mother distraught over her daughter's abuse, was not a tool of murder, but a critical mistake of compassion. A mistake that gives the father the moral edge. Mr. Matrosov, in his grief, could not bear to see his friend suffer the psychological strain of digging his own grave while sober. He sought only to dull the pain of the man who had already confessed and chose to die." The courtroom erupted in murmurs of agreement. This was Slav's edge, turning the damning evidence of the sedative into an act of humanity, a misguided, criminal, yet somehow understandable attempt to ease the suffering of his daughter's abuser. Slav's defense had skillfully flipped the narrative, giving him the emotional high ground. Thorne felt a cold frustration. They had the evidence, but the truth was too ugly for the public to accept. Later that evening, Thorne and Garcia were reviewing the final case files, looking for the tiny logical flaw that would shatter Petrov's defense. Garcia re-examined the initial scene photographs, muttering, "The shovel, the sedative, the gun, it all points back to that contract." "Wait," Thorne suddenly rasped, pointing at a high-resolution image of the shovel leaning against the redwood. "Zoom in on the handle." Garcia complied. Under the grime and faint traces of blood, there was a minute inscription: OS to LM, July 24. OS, Oleg Sviridov. LM, Lily Matrosov. The shovel wasn't just a random tool from the garage. It was a gift from the abuser to the victim. It was the gift of a trusted friend to his goddaughter, later used to prepare his own end. But that wasn't the dramatic reveal. It was the date. July 24. The abuse, according to Slav and Natalia's timeline, had been going on for months, right up until the night of Oleg's death. Why hadn't they disposed of this deeply personal, tainted tool? Slav said he found the videos a few days ago. He was heartbroken. He was betrayed. But what if he wasn't betrayed by the videos, but by the fact the videos had been deleted? Thorne remembered the original report. Slav called the police after finding video footage, but Natalia, in her confession, mentioned Oleg sending the proof. Thorne pulled up Oleg's final, desperate text. "I'm sorry, brother, I can't stop. Here is the proof. Do what you have to do." The police seized the tablet before Slav reported the death. If the footage was there, why did Oleg need to send it? Thorne realized Slav didn't find the abuse footage. He found the tablet, saw the abuse, and deleted the evidence immediately to protect his daughter and himself. Oleg, knowing Slav had the tablet and fearing exposure, not just from Slav, but from the legal system, sent a desperate, final, encrypted text containing the deleted proof, knowing it would be a trigger for his death. The truth was laid bare. Slav wasn't protecting the secret of the murder. He was protecting the fact that he had tampered
with the initial evidence of the abuse before the murder. He had secured his daughter's privacy before exacting his revenge. Slav was convicted of encouraging suicide, the crime the community could swallow, and sentenced to 18 months, serving 12. Natalia was given a suspended sentence. Justice, or what passed for it, was served. Thorne sat in his office months later, staring at the evidence photo of the wooden toy train, the unsettling farewell gift. The file was closed. Slav was home.